My daughter abandoned me at the gate like an old suitcase, and she did it with a smile on her face. "Sit here, Mom. We'll board together," she said, patting the empty plastic chair, as if I were a child who might wander off. Then she walked toward the line with her husband, waving her boarding passes in the air, and I watched the three of them talk to the agent while I sat where she'd planted me, hands folded on my purse like a good, obedient mother. The airport was loud and bright, all glass and announcements, but around me there was a kind of quiet. Families fussed with strollers, businessmen tapped on laptops, a baby screamed somewhere near the windows. I sat there in my navy cardigan, the one with the loose button, trying to look like I belonged. At 72, you learn to shrink your presence, to be grateful for the chair, the ticket, the invitation. Lillian had said this trip was important family time. Her words, not mine. She'd sent me links to the resort, the blue water and white towels, wrote that I deserved a little pampering for once. I believed her. That's the worst part. I let myself feel excited, like those women in the pictures who wear straw hats and laugh at something just out of frame. From my chair, I could see her profile at the counter. She was leaning toward the agent, talking too fast, her hand on her husband's arm. Daniel stood beside her, tall in that expensive, casual way I never trusted. There was another woman with them, too, a slim figure in a cream blazer holding a leather folder. I thought she was some kind of company representative, maybe from the travel agency. They all smiled at each other, papers changing hands, heads nodding. Every few seconds Lillian glanced back in my direction, not really at me, more like checking that I hadn't moved. I raised my hand once, a small wave, but she didn't lift hers. Her eyes slid past mine, quick and nervous, like someone walking by a shop window they can't afford to look into. The loudspeaker crackled. Flight 273 to San Diego now boarding all passengers in Group 1 and 2. I checked my boarding pass again, even though I already knew. Group 3. Lillian had told me she'd arranged it so we could all go together. "So you don't have to fuss with the crowd, Mom." Such thoughtful words. They tasted different now in my mouth. I watched as Daniel and the woman in the cream blazer walked toward the gate first, handing over their passes. The agent smiled at them, scanned, waved them through. Lillian stayed behind for a moment, phone in hand, typing something quickly. Then she turned and walked back toward me, her heels steady on the carpet. "Mom," she said softly, bending down so her hair fell like a curtain between us and the world. "They're having an issue with the system. They'll call our group in a minute. Just stay here, all right? Don't get up until I come for you." Her hand rested on my arm, light, almost weightless. I could smell her perfume, something sharp and floral that never suited her, in my opinion. I opened my mouth to ask about Daniel, about that other woman, but she pressed my arm a little harder. "It's just easier this way," she added, and kissed my cheek like she was doing me a kindness. You learn something, being a mother for over 40 years. You learn the thickness of your child's voice, when it's full and warm, and when there's a tight thread of fear running through it. Lillian's voice had that thread now. Not fear for me, fear of me moving, inserting myself where she didn't want me to be. She straightened, smoothed her blouse, and walked back toward the gate. I watched her from that same stupid chair, my back too straight, my hands careful on my handbag so they wouldn't tremble. I wanted to call out, to ask, "Why can't I stand in line with you like everyone else's mother?" But the words stacked up in my throat and refused to come. They called Group 3. People around me began to gather their things, stand, stretch, shuffle into a loose line. I waited for my daughter to turn, to wave, to beckon me over. She didn't. She handed her pass to the agent, smiled, walked down the jet bridge with the others. A minute later, they announced the final boarding call. I sat there, still clutching my ticket like a fool waiting for a bus that had already gone by. The agent at the podium glanced my way once, then turned back to her screen. The door at the end of the ramp closed with a soft final click I heard all the way from my seat. When the plane began to move, I could see part of its body through the tall windows, the tail sliding past like a white fin. I stood then, finally, one old woman in a navy cardigan, watching the aircraft that was supposed to hold my holiday, my daughter, my place at the table. It turned, rolled, grew smaller. I imagined Lillian buckling her seatbelt, laughing at something Daniel said, passing her phone to that other woman so she could see some joke I wouldn't understand. As the plane lifted, I felt something inside me give a quiet, deliberate shift, not a break. I've broken before. When my husband died, when I buried my sister, when I signed away pieces of my savings to help Lillian just this once. No, this was different. This was something heavy settling into a new position, like furniture finally dragged to the correct wall. By the time the wheels left the ground and the silver belly of the plane disappeared into the clouds, I already knew one thing with absolute clarity. The next flight I took would not be with my daughter. I didn't mean to walk toward the service desk. My feet simply carried me, the way they used to carry me toward my daughter's crib when she cried at night. An old instinct. Go to the one place where answers might be found. The young woman behind the counter looked up with the polite, empty smile people reserve for the elderly. "How can I help you, ma'am?" she asked, tapping her nails on the keyboard. I handed her my boarding pass, trying to keep my hand steady. "My daughter said there was an issue with the system," I said. "She told me to wait until she came back for me." The agent glanced at the screen and frowned. "Your group was called 20 minutes ago." Her eyes flicked to the gate, then back to me. They boarded. I swallowed. "Yes," I whispered. I saw the plane leave. For a moment, I expected her to say something like, "Let me check again," or, "Maybe they're still here." But she just softened her voice like she was speaking to someone fragile. "I'm sorry, ma'am." She hesitated, then lowered her tone. "If it helps, I saw your party come through earlier. The gentleman and the other woman checked in with him. They boarded in group 1. Other woman. There it was again, the phrase that floated around them at the gate like a quiet little rumor. "Who was she?" I asked, trying to make it sound casual. The agent hesitated. "I'm not sure, but she scanned a document with the same surname as your son-in-law." Same surname. My fingers tightened around the strap of my bag. "Was she family?" She shrugged. "They were listed together." That's all I can see. I thanked her and stepped away, moving as if the ground had turned soft. I found a bench near the window and sat down, staring at the runway where the plane had disappeared minutes earlier. The other woman, the same surname, boarded with Daniel as though she belonged there, as though I was the stranger. The airport lights flickered across the glass, and I caught my reflection. A small, tired woman with gray hair tucked behind her ears. A woman who had believed she was invited. My phone buzzed. A single text from Lillian. "Mom, please don't be upset. We'll explain everything later. It was complicated. I'll call when we land." No apology, no regret. Just a neat, polished explanation that explained nothing. I didn't respond. What would I write? Why did you leave me? Why didn't you look back? Why was that woman more entitled to your attention than your own mother? Instead, I sat there and let the truth settle, heavy but clean. My daughter had chosen to lie to me, to stage manage my Absence. She didn't want me on that plane. Not because of confusion, not because of boarding groups, because of that woman with the cream blazer and the quiet confidence of someone who already knows her place. My place, apparently, was here at the terminal, watching the people I loved fly away from me. A strange calm crept over me. Not the calm of acceptance, more like the clarity before a storm, when the air goes still and the birds vanish. I'd lived long enough to know that betrayals never happen in isolation. There is always a line of footsteps leading up to them, small choices, small silences. Lillian had been drawing away for years in ways I told myself were normal. Shorter visits, quicker goodbyes, calls that always came when she was driving somewhere else, as if she never had time to sit still with me. And Daniel, well, I never trusted the easy way he smiled, the way he spoke to me as if I were an outdated appliance his wife insisted on keeping. But I never imagined this, a woman boarding with his name, a woman who looked like she belonged more than I did. I stood up, suddenly aware that sitting and thinking would turn me into stone. There were answers out there, and I had wasted far too many years waiting for explanations that never arrived. The departures board above me flickered. A new line appeared, the next flight to their destination. I felt something shift inside me again, the same quiet weight from earlier, but sharper now. If Lillian didn't want me on their trip, fine, I wouldn't follow her. But I would find the woman who walked onto that plane with my son-in-law's surname, and I would hear the truth from someone who no longer had a reason to lie to me. I tightened my grip on my purse, walked to the counter, and said with a steady voice I hadn't heard from myself in years, "I need a ticket on the next flight." Airports have a strange way of stripping you down to your bare self. You walk through them without history, without the things that anchor you, your kitchen chair, your garden, the photographs on the mantle. You become just another body moving under the fluorescent lights. But as I stood in line for the next flight, clutching my ticket as if it might vanish from my hand, I didn't feel anonymous. I felt focused, almost sharpened. Something in me had shifted the moment Lillian's plane lifted off without me. And now every step I took felt deliberate, as though each movement were reclaiming a little of the dignity I had let her erode over the years. The flight was half empty, which suited me. I didn't want to talk to anyone, didn't want polite questions or half-hearted chatter. I sat by the window, watching the wings slice through clouds like a blade, and tried not to imagine what was happening several hours ahead of me. Lillian would land with Daniel and that other woman. They would collect their bags together. They would check into the resort together. And I would be arriving alone, uninvited, but no longer uncertain of my purpose. Somewhere over the desert, when the sky grew dim and the land below turned into an ocean of shadows, I closed my eyes and allowed myself to think of the one thing I had been avoiding. When had my daughter started hiding parts of her life from me? Not the small things. Everyone hides the small things. But the big things, the dangerous things, the things that involved legal papers and marriages and the quiet coiling of secrets. Lillian used to tell me everything. She was a talkative child, all elbows and opinions, always needing to be heard. Even in her 20s, she'd call me while grocery shopping, just to fill the silence in the aisles. Somewhere along the way, her life filled up with closed doors. And I, foolishly believing she needed space to be grown, didn't knock on them. When the plane landed, the air hit me like warm breath, dry, heavy, carrying the faint scent of dust and flowers, the kind of place where secrets don't dissolve. They settle into the ground and wait. I walked through the terminal quietly, reading the signs as though they were clues. Resort shuttle, baggage claim, private transport. I didn't know exactly where to find her, the woman in the cream blazer, but I had the one thing no one expected a 72-year-old to have: patience. I could wait longer than any of them. I'd been waiting years already. At the taxi stand, my driver looked young enough to be one of my former students, back from the days I taught literature part-time. He loaded my small suitcase into the trunk and asked where I was going. I told him the name of the resort Lillian had shown me in pictures: sunlit rooms, white sheets, glass balconies overlooking the sea. He whistled. "Big money," he said. "People don't come there unless they've got something to celebrate." I smiled without warmth. Or something to hide. He didn't ask what I meant. The ride took almost an hour. The sun was setting, and the sky turned into a wash of pinks and oranges that didn't feel real. I watched it in silence, feeling both too old and too alert, like someone who'd woken in the middle of surgery and realized she had work to do. At the resort entrance, everything gleamed: the marble steps, the gold handles, the polished glass. Too polished, too perfect. The kind of place where people dressed their lies in linen and called them misunderstandings. I tipped the driver and walked inside, letting the cold air conditioning settle over my skin like armor. The receptionist smiled brightly, but her eyes flicked down to the name I wrote on the check-in form. "Oh," she said, her tone shifting just slightly. "You're with the Harrow party." Harrow? Daniel's surname. Not Marsh. Not even Lillian's. Harrow. "I'd like to speak with the woman who checked in with Mr. Harrow earlier," I said. My voice didn't tremble. "The woman in the cream blazer." The receptionist blinked, surprised not by my question, but by my clarity. People my age aren't supposed to ask direct questions. We're supposed to shuffle around things politely. "Yes, of course," she said slowly. "Mrs. Harrow arrived 2 hours ago. She's in one of our executive suites." Mrs. Harrow, not Miss, not guest, not companion. My hand tightened on the counter. So, Lillian hadn't just left me at the gate. She had walked onto a plane with her husband and his other wife, and they had planned for me never to know. The receptionist gestured to the elevator. "Would you like us to notify her you're here?" I shook my head. "No, I'll go up myself." And as the elevator doors closed, I felt a steady, quiet certainty settle deep in my bones. Whatever truth waited behind that sweet door, I was finally ready to hear it. The hallway felt too quiet. Hotels like this are never truly silent. There's always music from somewhere, laughter drifting from a bar, the thump of a suitcase being wheeled across carpet. But here, outside the executive suites, everything sounded muffled, like the air itself was holding its breath. I walked slowly, counting the numbers on the doors: 412, 414, 416. My palms were dry, strangely steady. At my age, you stop trembling over confrontations. You tremble over medical charts, late-night phone calls, the sound of your own breath catching in the dark. This was almost peaceful in comparison. At 418, I stopped. The door was white, with a brass handle polished bright, as though someone had wiped it minutes earlier. I lifted my hand and knocked twice. Firm, not loud. I didn't want to frighten her. Whatever she was in this story, wife, partner, accomplice, she was still a woman, and I'd learned over many years that women rarely step into messes willingly. They're invited, pulled, manipulated, or cornered. There was a pause on the other side. Footsteps, then the soft click of a lock. When the door opened, the woman in the cream blazer stood there exactly as I remembered her at the gate. Composed, alert, elegant in that understated way people develop when they've learned to move without attracting suspicion. "Mrs. Marsh?" she asked quietly. Her voice surprised me. Not young, not brittle, but warm, steady. A voice that had spoken difficult truths before. "Yes," I said. "May I come in?" She stepped aside without hesitation. I walked into a room that smelled faintly of jasmine and hotel linen. The curtains were open, revealing a balcony with a view that would have made me gasp a day ago. Now it looked like a photograph someone else had paid for. She closed the door gently. "I wondered if you'd come," she said, watching me, not with fear, but with the careful politeness of someone who has spent a lifetime avoiding harm by reading the room perfectly. "I imagine you did," I answered. "Sit with me, if you don't mind." We sat at the small glass table near the window. She folded her hands neatly, as though preparing for a confession, and something in me softened, not with pity, but recognition. I had once been that woman, composed, dignified, carrying wounds so quietly that no one ever noticed. "My name is Evelyn," I said, "and before I ask anything, I want to hear one thing from you. Just one. Are you married to Daniel?" She didn't flinch. She didn't gasp, deny, or rush into explanation. She simply nodded, slowly, namefully. "Yes," she said. "Legally, yes." I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding, not shock, confirmation. "Does my daughter know?" She hesitated. And in that brief pause, the truth arrived before she spoke it. "She does," she whispered. I closed my eyes. I felt the room tilt and steady again. It wasn't the betrayal that stung. I had already tasted that at the gate. It was the years behind it, the invisible wall my daughter had been building while smiling at me across holiday tables. When I opened my eyes, the woman was watching me gently. Not with guilt, she owed me nothing, but with the sorrow of someone who understands exactly how cruel the truth can be. "I didn't want this," she said softly. "I didn't ask for it, but I stayed because I had reasons of my own." "We all do," I murmured. She reached into the leather folder on the table and pulled out a stack of documents, neatly clipped, organized, precise. "I thought you might come," she said. "And I thought, if you did, you deserve to see what he's done. Not just to you, but to me, to all of us." She slid the papers toward me. My eyes weren't as sharp as they once were, but I understood enough. Business agreements, property holdings, strange joint accounts, signatures that shouldn't be there. One signature in particular. Mine. My breath caught. "How did he get this?" "He forged it," she said. Quietly, as though saying the word louder would break something fragile between us. "More than once. Your name is on 2 of his investment documents, and on one of the trusts he created for Lillian." My heart twisted. My daughter. My own daughter, whose small hand I had held crossing streets, whose fevered forehead I had cooled with washcloths, whose rent I had helped pay when she said she was just getting on her feet. "She knew?" I asked. "She didn't at first," the woman said, "but she learned, and she stayed, and she let it continue." The room grew still again. Not empty, just still, like everything inside it understood that something important had shifted. I looked at the woman across from me. Not a rival, not an enemy, but another casualty. "What's your name?" I asked softly. "Margot," she said. I nodded. "Margot, I don't know yet what I'm going to do, but I want you to understand one thing." "What's that?" "I'm not here for revenge. I'm here for truth. Because once an old woman learns the truth, she becomes very difficult to deceive again. Margot's shoulders eased. She understood. More than anyone else in that room ever had. Outside, the sun had dipped lower, turning the balcony gold. Inside, something else was beginning. Not rage, not despair. A decision, still forming, quiet and precise. The kind that changes everything without ever raising its voice. Margot poured us both a glass of water, though neither of us drank. The papers lay between us like a small battlefield. Names, dates, signatures, each one a quiet injury. She watched me carefully, perhaps waiting for me to break down or rage or demand an explanation for every page. But at my age, emotions don't come in bursts anymore. They come in shifts, slow and tectonic, like the settling of a foundation after decades of standing still. "How long have you lived like this?" I asked her finally. 8 years, she said, folding her hands together. We married for legal reasons at first. His business needed a partner with residency. My family had that. He promised it was temporary. She paused, eyes drifting toward the balcony as if trying to measure the years by sunsets. Temporary became permanent, and then permanent became comfortable for him. She didn't need to finish the sentence. "And for you?" I asked. She gave a small, sad smile. "For me, it became a cage with silk curtains. Pretty enough to distract the eye. Not strong enough to hold my hope forever." Her voice didn't break. That was what struck me most. Her resilience, worn thin but still intact. Women endure in silence far longer than anyone realizes. The documents before us confirmed what my instincts had always whispered. Daniel made promises the way some men make investments, only when there was something to gain. And he used women like guarantees, shifting each of us into place whenever it suited him. Lillian must have known. But knowing and acting are two different things, and my daughter had always preferred convenience over courage. "Why didn't you leave him?" I asked gently. Margot gave a quiet, humorless laugh. "Why didn't you?" she countered. The question wasn't cruel. It wasn't even about Daniel. It was about the people we loved who stopped loving us back in a way we could recognize. It was about loyalty that outlived its purpose. About women who stayed because leaving required a kind of hardness we weren't raised to wield. "I suppose we both believed in the man he pretended to be," I said. She nodded. For a long moment, we just sat in silence, the room holding the weight of two women who had been kept in the dark too long. Then Margot leaned forward. "There's something else you should see," she said. From the folder, she pulled a separate envelope, thinner but handled more carefully. She slid it to me. I hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a notarized declaration listing beneficiaries to a portfolio I had never heard of. Real estate, offshore holdings, a long-term annuity. But the names listed were not what shocked me. Mine was there, not as a beneficiary, but as a guarantor. "What does this mean?" I asked, though I already suspected. "It means," Margot said softly, "that if anything happens to him, legal trouble, financial collapse, you are responsible. Lillian, too, but you most of all." She met my eyes with a steady gaze. "Your name carries the most stability. Your age, your pension, your assets. They used your reputation to protect themselves." I felt something inside me grow still, not numbness, clarity. I had been many things in my life: a wife, a mother, a teacher, a widow. But I had never been a fool, not truly, not until now. I need to understand something, I said. Did you know they were leaving me behind today? Margot looked stricken. No, she said immediately. I would never have agreed to that. I only learned this morning that Lillian told you to wait at the gate. She folded her hands as if bracing herself. When Daniel explained why, I felt sick. Why? I asked. She lowered her gaze. He said you ask too many questions, that you still pay attention, that you might see something you weren't meant to see. Meant to see? I repeated the words silently. My daughter had once held my face in her small hands and told me I could see everything, as though it were a superpower. Now she feared it. I stood slowly, my knees aching, the room wavering for a moment before steadying again. Margot rose with me. Evelyn, she said carefully, what will you do? I looked at her, a woman who'd lived in the shadows of someone else's choices, just like me. A woman who deserved to step into her own life again. I'm going to take back my name, I said quietly. My future, and whatever pieces of my daughter still belong to me, not the parts he's twisted. Margot nodded. Her eyes shone with something I didn't expect. Relief. Maybe even gratitude. If you need anything, anything at all, I'll help, she said. I believed her. We were no longer strangers. We were survivors of the same storm, finally stepping into the light. I opened the door to leave, but paused. Margot, I said, I'm not done with him. Or her, or any of this. She nodded once, firm and steady. Good, she said. It's time someone wasn't. I didn't go back to my room right away. I walked the hallway slowly, letting my hand drift along the smooth wallpaper as though reading Braille written by all the women who'd passed through here before me. Women who'd walked into truths they didn't expect, or who learned too late what their lives had been built on. My legs were tired, but something inside me was sharper than it had been in years, like the moment before a storm breaks and the air becomes a blade. When I reached the elevator, I didn't press the button. I stood there instead, watching the numbers shift as the car moved between floors. A young couple stepped out laughing, brushing past me with the easy confidence of people who believe the world is designed to cushion their fall. Once long ago, I had believed that too. Or maybe I'd simply believed love would catch me. But love is a slippery sort of safety. It disappears just when you lean your full weight on it. I took the stairs instead. The slow descent steadied me, the railing cool beneath my palm. Margot's documents were folded in my bag, a quiet weight that wasn't painful so much as clarifying. Someone had used my name, my life, to build protections for themselves. And Lillian. Well, I no longer knew what part of her choices belonged to her and what part belonged to Daniel. But I knew one thing. She had stopped choosing me. Outside, the air was warmer, carrying that strange coastal sweetness that comes just before nightfall. The resort glowed with soft lights, each path carefully landscaped, each corner designed to create the illusion of paradise. Illusions were Daniel's specialty, I realized. Beautiful facades with rotted beams hidden just beneath the paint. I walked toward the far end of the property, where the private villas overlooked the water. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for, only that I needed to see where he lived when he wasn't with my daughter. The villas were quiet, their windows lit from within like lanterns. I moved slowly, letting my steps fall into an old rhythm, the same rhythm I walked when my husband died, and I needed to feel the earth under me to remember I was still alive. At Villa 12, I stopped. I didn't know why at first, only that something felt familiar. An arrangement of shoes near the door, A jacket hung neatly on a hook, a suitcase still half unpacked. Through the sheer curtains, I saw 2 glasses on the counter, a bottle of wine open beside them. No voices, no shadows moving, just the stillness of a place lived in like a secret. This, I realized, was his other home. My pulse didn't quicken, my breath didn't catch. Instead, a steadiness spread through me, almost comforting. When you finally see the truth clearly, it loses its power to frighten you. I stepped back from the window, careful not to disturb anything. I had no desire to confront Daniel here. Not yet. Not while he believed everything in his life was still under his control. A man like that needed the rug pulled out from beneath him all at once, not tugged at slowly. As I turned to leave, I caught my reflection in the glass. A small, silver-haired woman standing alone in the glow of villa lights. But she did not look fragile. She looked resolved. A woman who had spent her life holding everyone else together and had finally decided to gather the pieces of herself. Walking back toward the main building, I felt the heaviness in my knees, the ache in my back, the familiar reminders that age has its price. But age also has its gifts. The patience Margot mentioned, the clarity to see when a lie begins and where it ends, and the quiet courage to act without the need for applause. When I reached my room, I locked the door behind me and sat at the desk. I pulled out the folder, smoothed the papers with the palm of my hand, and traced my forged signature with a fingertip. He had counted on my silence. He had counted on my dependence. He had counted on my love for my daughter. He had never counted on my strength. That was his first mistake, and it wouldn't be his last. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I lay in the dark, listening to the soft hum of the air conditioner and the distant echo of waves hitting rock. My body was exhausted, but my mind moved with the slow, relentless precision of a clock that had finally remembered its purpose. I kept seeing their signatures, Daniel's, Margot's, Lillian's, and then mine, falsified so neatly it almost mocked me. It is one thing to be deceived by strangers. It is another to discover that your own daughter stood by while someone carved your name into a lie. Around 2 a.m, I gave up on rest. I pushed myself up, slipped into my robe, and went to the balcony. The air smelled of salt and jasmine, cool against my skin. Below, the resort lights shimmered across the water in crooked lines. Somewhere in those reflections were the pieces of the life I thought I understood: marriage, motherhood, trust. All of them distorted now. I leaned on the railing, letting the metal press into my palms. All my life, I'd tried to keep my family intact, believing that if I was steady enough, loving enough, they would grow strong around me. But I had misunderstood the nature of roots. Some grow deep. Some wander sideways, searching for richer soil. And some simply rot where they stand. When dawn finally colored the sky with pale gold, I went inside and dressed. My joints protested, but I ignored them. Today wasn't for comfort. It was for clarity, for truth. I made my way to the resort cafe, where early risers murmured quietly over their coffee. I chose a table in the corner where I could see the entrance. I ordered tea, real tea with loose leaves, not the bagged dust hotels pass off as hospitality. The warmth steadied my hands. Half an hour later, Margot arrived. She looked tired, as if she too had slept only in fragments. But her spine was straight, her steps deliberate. She sat across from me without a word. I poured her a cup of tea, watching the steam rise between us like a fragile curtain. "You didn't sleep," she said softly. No, I answered. You didn't either. She shook her head. For a moment, we just breathed, two women bracing for what came next. I need to understand something, I began. Not about Daniel this time. About Lillian. Margot lowered her gaze, her fingers circling the rim of her cup. She wasn't always involved, she said. He eased her into things. First little favors, then little lies, then larger ones. She paused, a sad expression folding across her features. She believed helping him meant securing a future. She believed he needed her. I took this in slowly. She believed him more than she believed me. Margot didn't argue. She didn't offer comfort. She simply let the truth stand in the air between us. She wasn't cruel at the beginning, Margot continued. Just blinded, I suppose. He made her feel important, necessary. That is the oldest trick in the world, I murmured. It works on good women, she replied gently, especially ones who have spent their lives giving. We held each other's eyes then, a quiet recognition passing between us. Women like us, women who patched holes, who forgave too quickly, who believed loving someone meant tolerating the parts of them that clawed at our softness, were always the easiest to persuade. Evelyn, she said carefully, your daughter is not fragile. She made choices. I know, I answered, and I did. The hardest part was accepting that Lillian had been an architect of her own corruption. I folded my napkin, smoothing the edges. Daniel used my name to protect himself, I said, but she let him, and that means she thought my silence was guaranteed. Margot nodded. He believes that too. I took a slow sip of tea, letting the warmth move through me, settling the anger into something calmer, denser, more deliberate. Well, I said, setting the cup down with quiet finality. That was his second mistake. Margot leaned forward slightly. And the first? That he imagined age would make me weaker, I replied. Age only makes you done. After breakfast, I walked alone along the narrow stone path that curved toward the cliffs. The resort grounds were waking up. Gardeners trimming hedges, sunburned tourists wandering out in sandals, staff rolling carts with neatly folded towels. The world was carrying on, oblivious to the fact that my life had split open somewhere between Gate 12 and Margot's suite. That is the strange thing about private disasters. They rarely make a sound outside your own bones. The ocean below pushed its weight against the rocks in slow, rhythmic breaths. I stood at the railing, letting the wind lift strands of my hair. My husband used to say the sea was a truth teller, that it stripped everything down to its bare shape. Perhaps he was right, because standing there, looking at that endless blue, I understood something simple but sharp. I no longer needed to save anyone. Not my daughter. Not Margot. And certainly not Daniel. There is a tenderness in release, one I had never allowed myself to feel. Mothers are conditioned to hold on, even when our palms bleed from the effort. But I felt no pain now, only an unexpected lightness, as if I had set down a suitcase I'd been carrying for decades without knowing its weight. I sat on a nearby bench, the wood still cool from the night. I took out the documents Margot had given me, smoothing them on my lap. The forged signature, my name written by someone else's ambition, didn't sting the way it had the first time. It felt almost distant now, like an artifact from a life I no longer agreed to inhabit. I traced the lines slowly. Legal terms, beneficiaries, liability. None of it frightened me. Age teaches you that paperwork is just paper until someone stands behind it. And now I was standing. A man passed by walking his dog and nodded politely. I nodded back. That small exchange anchored me in a way I didn't expect. The world was still intact. My heartbreak had not cracked the pavement. I tucked the papers back into my bag and closed it with a decisive snap. There was no urgency in me now, no rush to confront or accuse. I had no desire for scenes. Those were for people who wanted to be heard. I wanted something quieter, to reclaim the parts of my life that had been carelessly borrowed or quietly stolen. On my way back, I passed a young woman adjusting the strap of her swimsuit, laughing loudly into her phone. I wondered if she knew yet how unforgiving life could be, how even the brightest mornings could turn with a single sentence. "Sit here, Mom. We'll board together." For a moment, I envied her. Then I didn't. I had lived enough years to know that survival is more valuable than innocence. Back in my room, I opened the curtains wide. Sunlight flooded the space, softening the corners, warming the carpet where my shoes rested neatly side by side. I sat at the small desk and took out a pen from my purse, one with a fine black tip, the kind I used to sign report cards and permission slips when Lillian was small. I drew a clean sheet of hotel stationery toward me. No shaking, no hesitation. Not everything needed to be said aloud. Some truths required only ink and intention. I wrote slowly, thoughtfully, letting the words take the shape they needed. When I finished, I folded the paper and slipped it into an envelope. My handwriting was steady, almost elegant. The kind of penmanship you practice in childhood and forget in adulthood, only to rediscover when you've lived long enough not to rush. I sealed the envelope, placed it in my bag, and sat back. My heartbeat was calm. My mind was clear. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't even confrontation. It was preparation. Because soon, very soon, everyone involved would learn a truth Daniel had underestimated. A woman who has finally stopped hoping is a woman who has nothing left to lose. And that makes her powerful in ways no one sees coming. I spent the morning sitting by the window of the lobby cafe, not to watch people, but to watch their patterns. The Harrows, my daughter included, moved through life as if the world were an arranged stage, staff stepping aside for them, doors opening on cue. Their conversations carried with the casual confidence of people who assumed permanence. I had once believed in that kind of permanence too, the kind that comes from love, from marriage, from raising a child. But permanence is only an illusion until someone stops pretending. Around noon, I saw Daniel stride across the courtyard toward the main building. He wasn't with Lillian or Margot. He walked alone, moving quickly, head down, talking into his phone with the irritation of a man whose plans had hit an unexpected snag. I watched him disappear inside. My pulse did not change. I didn't feel anger. Just an increasing certainty that he had no idea how fragile his careful architecture had become. I returned to my room to retrieve the envelope I had written the night before. The paper inside felt almost warm, as if it had absorbed my resolve. I slipped it into my handbag and walked to the manager's office. A young man in a navy suit greeted me politely. I explained that I needed a simple courtesy, confirmation of the suite numbers registered under the Harrow name. He checked the system without a flicker of hesitation. People rarely question older women who speak calmly and dress neatly. They assume we are harmless. Daniel and Lillian's suite, Margot's suite, and one more, in a separate wing. A name I didn't recognize. A shell company, perhaps. A place he used for business or secrets? The manager did not elaborate, and I did not ask. I had enough truth for now. I walked the grounds again, this time with purpose. The sun was high, the heat settling across my shoulders. But I welcomed the wait. It reminded me I was still here, still capable, still choosing the direction of my steps. When I reached the far side of the property, I found a shaded bench beneath a sprawling bougainvillea. From there, I could see the path leading from Margot's suite, and farther away, the entrance to the villa where Daniel had been living his double life. I waited, but not anxiously. Waiting is a skill age perfects. Some women wait for apologies. Some wait for love to return. I waited for clarity. It arrived in the shape of my daughter. Lillian stepped out of the villa corridor wearing sunglasses and a linen dress, her hair carefully arranged, her movements crisp in that way she adopted when she wanted to appear in control. She looked around, checking for someone. Maybe Daniel, maybe Margot. Certainly not me. She believed I was still at home, waiting for her call, still obedient, still small. I stood. She froze when she saw me, her entire posture collapsing for a second before she gathered herself again. Her hand went to her throat, then fell. "Mom," she said, her voice tight. "What are you doing here?" I walked closer, steady and unhurried. "I came on the next flight," I said, "since you didn't come back for me." Color rose in her cheeks. She opened her mouth, trying to summon a story, but there was nothing for her to reach for now. Lies lose their footing when the truth stands in front of them. "You shouldn't have come," she said. "This isn't the time." "It wasn't the time at the airport," I replied. "It wasn't the time when you signed documents you didn't understand. It wasn't the time when you let him use my name. But here we both are." Her face tightened. "You don't know everything." "No," I said softly, "but I know enough." She looked around again, as if hoping Daniel would appear and step between us. But he didn't. And perhaps for the first time in her adult life, she was alone with the consequences of her choices. I reached into my bag and took out the envelope. I held it out to her. She stared at it as though it were a burning coal. "What is this?" "Something for you to read," I said. "Not now, later, when you're ready to see the world without filters." She hesitated, then took it with trembling fingers. I stepped back. She didn't say thank you. She didn't apologize. She just stood there, clutching the envelope, suddenly small against the vast brightness of the day. I left her there without another word. Women like me do not need to shout to be heard. Silence can be sharper than any blade when it is finally ours to wield. I didn't follow Lillian. I let her stand in that courtyard clutching the envelope as if it might steady her, though nothing in her life had been steady for years except the lies she'd chosen to tolerate. I walked back toward the main building, each step measured, grounded, as though the resort path had become a kind of slow awakening. The ocean wind was stronger now, pushing the scent of salt and hibiscus through the palm trees. My mind felt sharper than it had in decades. Age may take speed, but it grants precision. Inside, the lobby was cool, dim, and quiet. A pianist in the corner played something soft and reflective. I sat near the window where the light touched the floor in faint golden squares. I ordered nothing this time. I simply rested my hands on the small table and let my breath settle into a calm rhythm. I had learned young that stillness was a kind of power, the kind people mistake for weakness until it is too late to correct the error. I didn't wait long before Daniel appeared. He walked in with the brisk, irritated stride of a man accustomed to arranging the world around his comfort. He hadn't seen me yet. His attention was fixed on his phone, thumb moving fast as he typed, jaw tight. When he finally looked up, his eyes landed on me with a jolt of recognition, then confusion, then something sourer, fear, though he tried to smother it beneath a shallow smile. "Evelyn," he said, voice pitched too high. "I didn't know you were here." "No," I replied. "You didn't." He approached my table, trying to appear composed, but I could see the edges fraying, his shoulders too stiff, his breath a fraction too fast. A small satisfaction bloomed inside me. Not triumph. Just confirmation that truth unsettles the guilty more deeply than accusation ever could. "Lillian should have explained," he began, sliding into the seat across from me without asking. "There were circumstances, complications. It wasn't personal." Men like him always believed they could talk themselves out of the consequences of their own cruelty. They relied on charm, on rehearsed sincerity, on the assumption that the women around them were too hesitant to push back. I met his gaze calmly. "Leaving me at the gate was personal, Daniel. Every deception you built was personal." He shifted, choosing a different tactic. "You misunderstood. The woman with us, Margot, she's a business partner, nothing more." "You're lying," I said, before he could decorate the sentence further. "And you're not good at it today." His eyes flickered, the first real crack in his composure. "What did she tell you?" he asked. "Enough." A muscle in his jaw tightened. He leaned in, lowering his voice. "Evelyn, you're involving yourself in matters that don't concern you." "They concern me," I said, "because you involved my name without my consent. You used it as a shield." He opened his mouth, but I lifted a hand gently, the way I used to quiet my students when their excuses ran out. He froze. "I saw the documents," I continued. "I saw my forged signature. I saw the accounts, the trusts, the liabilities, and I know what you risked by placing my name there." He swallowed, a small, involuntary movement. "You don't understand the business. These things are complicated. Only if you build them on deceit." He sat back, realizing charm had failed, that deflection had failed, that the old woman in front of him was not afraid, not confused, not pliable. His confidence faltered. Good. I wanted him to feel, even briefly, the vulnerability he had cultivated in others. "What do you want?" he asked finally. "I want nothing from you," I said. "But you will no longer use my name. You will not attach it to your schemes or your debts. You will not forge it. You will not presume my silence." "And Lillian?" he asked, voice suddenly cautious. "She will face her own choices. They are hers to carry now." He drew a slow breath, realizing that the ground beneath him was shifting, that his easy power was thinning like smoke in wind. He stood abruptly, smoothing his shirt as if that might restore his authority. "This isn't finished," he muttered. I looked up at him, steady and unshaken. "You're right. It isn't." And for the first time since I'd arrived, he walked away without a smile. I stayed seated long after Daniel left, letting the quiet of the lobby return to its natural rhythm. People moved around me, couples checking in, a group of women in sun hats laughing too loudly, a child dragging a stuffed rabbit by the ear. Ordinary life, moving without awareness of the small, precise dismantling that had just occurred at a table in the corner. I felt no triumph, only a steadiness, like a stone finally settling into the place where it was meant to rest. After a while, I rose and walked outside. The sun was lowering itself toward the ocean, turning everything gold and soft, like a photograph from a kinder time. I followed the stone path toward the private suites, not because I wanted another confrontation, but because I needed to see for myself who Lillian had become away from my eyes. Mothers often pretend their children remain who they once were, a softness, a promise. but children grow into people with their own shadows. I reached the steps of the suite she shared with Daniel. The curtains were half drawn, the room dim, 2 suitcases open on the floor. I knocked gently. No one answered. I waited, then knocked again. When the door finally opened, it was Lillian. Her eyes red-rimmed, her hair slightly mussed as though she had been running her hands through it over and over. "Mom," she said in a cracked voice, "you shouldn't be here." I stepped inside without asking. She moved back automatically, like a child yielding space. The room smelled faintly of perfume and unease. A half-filled glass of wine sat beside the bed. Papers, hers, not Margot's, lay scattered on the desk. She had read the letter. "You knew what he was doing," I said quietly. "You may not have known in the beginning, but eventually, you did." She closed her eyes, the denial forming and dissolving on her lips. "It wasn't like that." "It was exactly like that," I replied. "And the only reason you're ashamed now is because I found out." She sank into the armchair, curling her legs under her like she used to do as a teenager when conversations became too heavy. I saw not the successful adult she pretended to be, but the frightened girl she had never stopped being. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she whispered. "Hurt requires intention," I said. "You didn't intend it, but you allowed it." Her breath shuddered. She reached for a tissue, then another, as if she could wipe herself into a different memory. "Daniel said it was temporary, that the documents needed stability, that it was just business. Mom, he made it sound harmless." "Harmless people don't forge signatures," I said. "Harmless men don't ask their wives to lie to their mothers. Harmless men don't collect relationships like insurance policies." She buried her face in her hands. I didn't know how to stop it. "You start," I said gently, "by not defending it." She looked up then, eyes wet but finally steady. "You're angry with me." "I'm disappointed," I corrected. Anger fades. Disappointment lingers. Her shoulders slumped. I was scared. He made it sound like everything would fall apart if I didn't cooperate. "And so you sacrificed your own integrity," I said. "And mine." Silence filled the room, thick but strangely cleansing. She let the words settle because she could no longer outrun them. Finally, she whispered, "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to protect myself," I said. "Something I should have done sooner. Something you should have learned from me instead of from him." She swallowed hard. "And me? Can I fix this?" "That depends," I said. "Do you want to fix the mess, or the person you've become inside it?" Her breath caught, a small, wounded sound. But she didn't look away. That was new. I walked to the door, pausing with my hand on the handle. "Lillian, I love you. But love doesn't mean I stand still while you walk away from who you are." She nodded slowly, absorbing it like a medicine that burned going down. "Mom," she called softly, "please don't disappear from my life." I turned back. "I'm not disappearing. I'm stepping out of the shadows you left me in." And for the first time in years, I saw something true flicker across her face. Not fear, not denial, but the faint beginning of understanding. I walked out of Lillian's suite and down the quiet corridor, letting the soft carpet absorb my steps. My heart felt heavy, but not in the way it once did when she disappointed me in small, human ways. This was different. This was the weight of finally seeing my own child without the halo I had spent years holding above her head. I didn't hate her for it. Hate requires energy, and at 72, I had learned to save my strength for the things that mattered. But I felt something quieter, something deeper. The kind of sorrow that comes when you realize a bond has been stretched so thin it might not hold its shape again. I stepped outside into the late afternoon light. The ocean wind had grown cooler, stirring the hem of my dress. I recognized the feeling that settled over me, resolve disguised as calm. It had carried me through funerals, through widowhood, through nights when I didn't know how to be both strong and alone. And now it carried me toward the final part of this unraveling. Daniel was standing near the entrance to the private villas, his phone in hand, pacing. He didn't see me at first. His voice was low but sharp, the words clipped with irritation. When he finally looked up, the annoyance in his expression vanished, replaced by a thin, brittle smile. I had seen men use that exact smile at business dinners with my husband. Polite, controlled, full of the desperate need to appear unbothered. "Evelyn," he said, slipping his phone into his pocket, "I was going to find you." "No," I answered. "You weren't." He hesitated. Just a second, but enough. Cowards always reveal themselves in the pauses. "I know things feel tense," he began, using that tone men use when they believe they're negotiating. "There are explanations. Things Margot may have exaggerated, things you might have misunderstood." "I understood perfectly," I said. "Margot told me the truth. The documents told me the truth. And now Lillian has seen it too." His jaw tightened. "You had no right to involve her. She involved herself when she let you use my name, when she lied to me, when she stood beside you at an airport and pretended I was part of your life while arranging my absence." His breath came a little faster. His confidence had cracks now, visible even in the dimming light. "What are you going to do?" he asked, trying to sound casual but failing. "I'm going to remove myself from your structure," I said, "and when I do, it will collapse. You built it on the wrong woman." He stared at me as if he didn't recognize the person standing before him. And maybe he didn't. For years I had been the harmless mother-in-law, quiet, generous, grateful for any crumbs of inclusion. He didn't see the woman who had raised a family, buried a husband, paid every bill, survived every hardship with dignity. He had mistaken mildness for blindness. "Evelyn," he said slowly, "you must understand that if you withdraw your name, you will lose everything," I finished for him. "Yes, I do understand." "And Lillian?" he asked. "You would let her fall with me?" "She will fall only into the truth," I said. "What she chooses after that is her own to decide." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You don't want to create a scandal. People will talk. It will hurt you too." I almost smiled. "Daniel, I am 72. The only thing that hurts me now is dishonor, not gossip." He didn't speak. He simply looked at me, realizing perhaps for the first time that I was no longer someone he could manipulate. His expression flickered between disbelief and resentment, as if age had betrayed him by granting me clarity instead of confusion. "I'm leaving tomorrow," I said. "When I return home, my lawyer will begin the process of removing my name from everything you touched, every signature, every false authorization, every account." "You're making a mistake," he said through his teeth. "No," I replied, soft but certain. "I'm correcting one." Behind him, the sky had turned the color of embers. A single gull flew low over the water, its wings steady, unhurried. I watched it for a moment, then looked back at him. "This is the last conversation we will ever have," I said. "Whatever comes next for you or for my daughter is no longer mine to carry." He opened his mouth, but no words came. I walked past him without looking back. Some truths don't need to be repeated to be understood. I didn't return to my room right away. Instead, I walked the long curve of the resort grounds until the lights behind me softened into a gentle blur. The night air was cooler than I expected, brushing against my skin like a familiar comfort I hadn't known I needed. There is something sobering about walking alone at my age. Your body moves more slowly, but your mind becomes exact, deliberate. I had spent too many years thinking clarity belonged to the young. It doesn't. It belongs to the wounded who've finally stopped pretending. A row of lanterns lit the path toward the cliff overlook. I followed it, listening to the ocean breathe against the rocks. It struck me then that life continues no matter who leaves you, no matter who betrays you, no matter who has misunderstood your gentleness for weakness. The sea didn't pause for my sorrow. It didn't rage for my anger. It simply moved, the way truth moves when it's no longer resisted. I reached the railing and rested my hands on the cool metal. Below, the waves rose and broke in slow white curls. I thought of my husband, how he'd stand behind me with his hands on my shoulders, steady as a pillar. He had been gone for years, yet in moments like this I could almost feel him again. Not as comfort, but as memory reminding me that I had once been part of something honest. I didn't cry. I had cried enough in my lifetime to recognize when tears would not serve me. Instead, I breathed slowly, letting the air fill the places inside me that betrayal had hollowed out. I wasn't empty. I was being cleared. Footsteps approached from behind, light, hesitant. I didn't need to turn to know it was Margot. There was a gentleness in her presence, the kind that came from long endurance rather than frailty. "May I stand with you?" she asked quietly. "Of course," I said. She took her place beside me, leaving just the right amount of distance. We watched the ocean for a long moment. Two women, bound not by friendship or blood, but by a shared understanding of the man who had taken pieces from us both. "He's frightened," she said. I could see it in his eyes earlier, not of consequences, of exposure. "Men like him always are," I replied. "They depend on darkness. Truth has a way of burning the curtains." Margot exhaled softly, almost amused. I'm ashamed to admit it, but seeing him unsettled, it eased something in me. "There's no shame in that," I said. "Relief is not vengeance. It's simply the body recognizing danger is losing its grip." She turned her face toward me, studying me with that calm intelligence she carried like a second skin. "What will you do when you leave here?" "Begin the process," I said. "The legal removals, the financial corrections, the quiet reclaiming of everything he borrowed without permission. I'll handle it with precision. I'm too old for theatrics." "You don't look old," she said gently. "You look resolved." I smiled at that, a real smile, small but warm. Resolution is the only thing age never takes. Margot placed her hand lightly on the railing. "I want to thank you," she said, "not for confronting him, but for seeing me. No one has seen me in a very long time." "You made yourself invisible to survive him," I said. "It's time to be seen again." Her eyes shone, not with tears, but with recognition. We stood together until the sky deepened to a deeper blue, two silhouettes carved into the quiet. For once, there was no urgency, no confusion, just a shared stillness between two women who had finally stepped out of the shadows cast by one man's ambition. When she turned to leave, she paused. "Evelyn, you've changed everything." "No," I said. "I simply stopped allowing everything to change me." And when she walked away, I remained at the railing, watching the horizon stretch open like a promise I hadn't known was waiting for me. The next morning, I woke before dawn, the room still wrapped in that pale, uncertain light that makes everything look softer than it is. I lay still for a moment, listening to the muted hum of the ceiling vent and the distant hush of waves. My body ached the way it always did when the weather shifted, but the ache felt almost welcome now, a reminder that I was still here, still capable, still moving forward under my own strength. I rose slowly, rinsed my face, and brushed my hair back into its quiet silver frame. There was no ceremony to the act, just the calm preparation of a woman ready to step out of one world and into another. I opened the balcony door and let the morning air drift in. The sky was streaked with pink, the kind of color that looks delicate until you remember the sun produces it with fire. I stood for a long while, watching the horizon take shape. I had arrived at this resort as a discarded passenger, a woman left sitting at a gate with a promise that dissolved into jet fuel. Now I stood on the threshold of leaving on my own terms, carrying nothing they had carved onto me, only what I chose to keep. I packed slowly, folding my clothes with care. There is something strangely cleansing about packing after a reckoning. You choose what comes with you and what remains behind. I left nothing of myself here, except the older version of me who arrived still hoping her daughter could be the woman she once imagined. Hope, I realized, can be a gentle poison when it keeps you from seeing the truth. By the time I reached the lobby, it was fully morning. Guests moved through the space with that lazy vacation confidence, sun hats, sandals, coffees cradled in both hands. They walked past me without a glance, unaware that an entire history was being laid to rest in their midst. I approached the front desk, checked out with a quiet thank you, and stepped outside into the warmth. A shuttle was waiting to take departing guests to the airport. As I approached, I heard footsteps behind me. Light, hurried. I didn't turn until I heard my name. Mom. Lillian stood a few feet away, her dress wrinkled, her face bare of makeup, the envelope I'd given her clutched in her hand. She looked smaller than I remembered, not physically, but inwardly. The kind of smallness that comes from a sudden collapse of certainty. "I read it," she said. Her voice was strained, as though the words scraped her throat on their way out. "All of it." I nodded. "I expected you would." She approached slowly, like someone unsure whether they were welcome. "I didn't know some of those things," she insisted. "Not all of them. I knew pieces. I told myself they were harmless. Lies are never harmless," I said gently. "Especially the ones we tell ourselves." Her eyes glistened. "I'm not asking you to forgive me right now. I didn't want you to leave without knowing that I see it now. What I became, what I allowed." Seeing her stand there, vulnerable, stripped of her practiced poise, I felt something shift inside me, not softening exactly, but clearing. My love for her was not gone. Love is not a switch. But it had changed shape, becoming something steadier, something with its own boundaries at last. "I hope," I said quietly, "that you learn to choose yourself someday. Not him, not convenience, yourself." She wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. "Will you come home?" Yes, I said, but not to the same place I left. She understood. I saw it in the way her shoulders lowered, not in defeat, but in acceptance. Growth begins exactly there. The shuttle driver opened the door behind me. I placed a hand on the rail to climb in, then looked back one final time. Take care of your soul, Lillian, I said. It's the only part of you he never managed to touch. She nodded, tears slipping freely now, and whispered, I will try. There was nothing left to say. I stepped onto the shuttle, feeling the weight of the resort fall behind me as the door closed. I sat by the window, watching my daughter grow smaller as the bus pulled away, until she was no longer a figure, but a memory I had finally allowed to stand on her own legs. For the first time in years, I felt light, not because everything had healed, but because I had finally stopped carrying what was never mine to hold. The airport was nearly empty when I arrived. Morning light streamed through the high windows, soft and forgiving, touching everything with a kind of gentleness I hadn't felt in days. I moved through security slowly, not because my body demanded it, but because I finally could. No one rushed me. No one told me to sit and wait. No one measured my usefulness by whether I made things easier for them. I was simply a woman with a boarding pass and her own quiet destination. Nothing more, nothing less. When I reached the gate, I chose a seat by the window. The runway stretched wide and clean, a long ribbon of possibility. I didn't feel the sting of what had happened at the other airport anymore. That moment, my daughter's soft command, their hurried departure, the burn of realization, belonged to another version of me, a version who still believed she existed only on the edges of other people's lives. That woman had been left at gate 12. The woman who sat here now had taken back her place. I opened my bag and pulled out a small notebook I used to keep grocery lists in. Now it held something else. Decisions. Not impulsive ones, but measured steps I would take once I got home. The first page held the name of my attorney, underlined twice. The second page listed every document Margot had shown me, written out in the neat, looping script I had assumed age had taken from me. The third page held something far simpler. Protect your future. Protect your peace. I found myself tracing those words with the tip of my finger. They didn't feel like instructions. They felt like permission. A group of teenagers sat a few rows away, laughing too loudly, their energy bouncing off the quiet morning. I watched them with a soft smile. Life is loud when you still believe it owes you its attention. My life wasn't loud anymore, but it was clear. And clarity, I'd learned, was its own form of power. My flight was called. I stood, feeling the small ache in my knees, the familiar stiffness in my back. These were not burdens. They were proof that I had lived long enough to understand what mattered. I joined the short line at the gate, my boarding pass held lightly in my hand. No one looked past me. No one whispered. I was not an afterthought in anyone's story. I was simply part of the world, moving through it with my own quiet weight. As I stepped onto the jet bridge, I felt a breeze, just a faint one, carrying the smell of coffee and something metallic. It brushed across my face like a reminder. You survived. Not dramatically, not loudly, but fully. I thought of Lillian, standing on the resort steps with tears on her cheeks. I hoped she would find her way back to herself. I hoped she would grow, but her journey, whatever shape it took, was hers now. For once, I wasn't trying to cushion her steps. Inside the plane, I settled into my seat by the window. A young woman took the aisle seat beside me. She smiled politely, adjusting a book in her lap. I returned the smile, small but sincere. The engines hummed low, a comforting vibration beneath my feet. I looked out at the runway, the sunlight shimmering across it like a promise. When the plane lifted from the ground, I didn't close my eyes. I watched until the world below became tiny and soft and kind. I thought of Margot's steady courage, of Lillian's trembling honesty, of Daniel's cracking facade, of the woman I'd once been and the woman I was now. And I understood, with a quiet certainty I hadn't felt in years, that dignity isn't something others give you. It's something you reclaim when no one is watching. Some victories arrive in silence. Some triumphs don't need applause. Some lives begin again at 72, in a window seat on an ordinary morning. If you've lived long enough to know disappointment, long enough to survive neglect, long enough to stand up from a place you were never meant to stay, then you already understand this truth. Strength returns the moment you stop asking for permission. And if this story made you feel seen, even a little, then stay with me. Follow, comment, share your voice. Stories like ours matter more than people think.